I am Iset, daughter of Nebet, and I have drawn my first breath in the shadow of the battlefield. My mother was not a weaver of linen or a maker of beer, as most women of Thebes. She was a sow, a healer who served with the armies of Pharaoh Sethi the One, and her mother before her. In our family, we do not stay behind the walls of the fortress while the men march to war. We follow the black earth of Egypt with our healing hands, for even the mightiest pharaoh bleeds like any man. I remember the day I first held a scalpel. I was 6 years old, and my mother carved a small blade from obsidian. "This is not for cutting bread," she said, her voice as steady as the Nile at flood season. "With this, you will cut away Isfet from the flesh of warriors. With this, you will serve Maat by preserving life." The training was brutal. While other girls learned to grind grain and spin flax, I learned to bind wounds with linen strips soaked in honey and crushed willow bark. I practiced setting broken bones until my hands moved without thinking. I memorized the properties of herbs that could stop bleeding or ease pain: aloe from Punt, myrrh from the Red Sea, and poppy from the fields of the Delta. My fingers ached from the constant work, but my mother would say, "Only when you can work without flinching at the sight of blood will you be ready for the battlefield." By the time I was 15, I stood among the healers who accompanied the archers of Ammon, one of the 4 divisions of Pharaoh Ramesses' mighty army. We were stationed at Ramesses, where the air smelled of baking brick and the sound of hammering never ceased. I wore a simple linen dress, but over it I carried a leather apron stained with the blood of 100 battles. My hair was shorn short like the men's, practical for the work I did, though I wore a single golden fly at my throat, the mark of a healer who had saved many lives. I carried the tools of my ancestors, not a bow or spear, but a healer's kit. Small bronze knives for cutting away cloth from wounds, needles and thread for closing gashes, clay jars of medicinal ointments, and linen bandages that I had woven myself. I knew every pressure point that could stop bleeding and every herb that could ease pain. My hands were my weapons, and they were as deadly to death itself as any arrow to the enemy. I remember the morning we set out for Kadesh. The camp buzzed with activity before dawn. While the men sharpened their bronze blades and checked their chariots, I prepared my medicines. My mother taught me that a healer must know the battlefield as well as any soldier, for the difference between life and death often lies in how quickly a wound can be treated. "Remember," my mother said as we packed our kits, "the battlefield is a river of blood. You must move through it like the crocodile, swift, silent, and sure of your path. Find the living among the dead, for the dead need no healing." The journey to Kadesh was long, but not without purpose. We passed forts along the way, those strongholds of sun-dried brick that guarded Egypt's borders. Each had walls 4 to 8 meters thick, with ditches before them, garrisoned by permanent troops and scribes who recorded every traveler. "Here passed 32 Bedouins and 3 donkeys," as one inscription might read. When we reached the land of the Hittites, I saw for the first time the true cost of war. The battlefield was chaos, chariots overturned, men screaming, arrows falling like rain. The Hittite chariots carried 3 men instead of 2, and they charged through our lines like a sandstorm. I saw young conscripts fall with Hittite lances, piercing their bronze scales. My mother moved among them, her hands steady as she worked. I followed her example, cutting away armor to reach wounds, pressing linen against bleeding arteries, whispering prayers to Sekhmet as I worked. One young archer, I could not have been more than a year older than me, lay with a Hittite arrow through his thigh. The bronze head was buried deep, and the blood pulsed with his heartbeat. I remembered my mother's lessons. Cut around the shaft, never pull it through. The wound must breathe to heal. As I worked, I heard Pharaoh Ramesses shout to Ammon, "Oh, my father Ammon, where are you when I need you?" The fear in his voice was the same as in the boys I was treating. No different, despite the gold on his arms. The Hittites were too many. They surrounded us, and I saw comrades fall. Just when all seemed lost, the Nerin arrived, reinforcements from Amaru who turned the tide of battle. That night, as we tended to the wounded and counted the dead, Pharaoh stood before us, his armor dented but his spirit unbroken. He wore the gold of valor around his neck, 3 golden flies that symbolized persistence in battle. Around his wrists were golden bracelets, the highest honor for a warrior who had distinguished himself in combat. I did not earn golden flies that day, but I saved lives, and that was honor enough for a healer. Later, when the victory stele were carved, Pharaoh would claim that Amun himself had fought beside him, that the god had given him the strength to defeat the Hittites single-handedly. Such was the way of our records. Only victories were remembered. Only Pharaoh's glory was eternal. Now, in my old age, my hands no longer move with the speed of youth, but I still feel the pulse of life beneath my fingers. I teach the daughters of Thebes the art of healing, showing them how to prepare medicines, how to bind wounds, how to find the living among the dead. They ask me about the Battle of Kadesh, about the might of Pharaoh Ramesses. I tell them what I saw, the dust, the blood, the fear, and the courage. But I also tell them what the scribes do not carve in stone, that even the greatest pharaohs bleed, that even the mightiest armies suffer losses, and that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising again to defend the black land of Egypt. For I am Iset, daughter of Nebet, and I have drawn my first breath in the shadow of the battlefield. And though my hands are still now, the memory of their work will echo through eternity.